Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. And we're zooming in and focusing in a little bit more in depth on a great viewer question. And that was, what role does my past have to do with keeping me in these dysfunctional relationships? I think that this is such a great question, and it also gives you an opportunity to really understand yourself, human nature, the journey, the importance of child and learning and understanding the role and place of childhood programming and experiences and episodes and events, and how they create the feelings that you carry with you throughout the journey, throughout time, very much like holding onto a quarter or a suitcase or a token or a medal. And so oftentimes people have healthy upbringings, and that is typified by the ability to be able to communicate, to have conversations that are two-way, where you are not shamed, you're not criticized, but you are listened to, guided, nurtured, supported, and allow yourself to have individuation or boundaries. So, and there's a lot more than that, but just for the purpose of understanding in this video here, is to understand the correlation or the how your past, particularly maybe your childhood or your upbringing, experiences that are most formative and impactful are between the ages of 0 and 8 years old. I mean, a lot of our behaviors and our emotions and our perceptions are set up in that time frame. So your perceptions of the events then lead to and trigger feelings, either particular, feelings of love, warmth, understanding, connection, community, nurturing, being able to be fostered and being set up for success, having a realistic understanding of your parents, it could be fraught with, it can be, your past might have been a lovely childhood, or it might have been fraught with chaos, yelling, anger, insulting behaviors, criticism, pegging one sibling against the other. All these dynamics set up experiences or events that then create the feelings which are associated with those and which are carried through time. So your feelings repeated over a period of time, which are, a reaction to your these events. So you have feelings and then emotions, which sets the energy in motion. Then becomes, if it's chronically repeated over time, that becomes a mood. And then mood repeated over time becomes a temperament. And then temperament eventually becomes your identity, your character, your habits, your thought habits, your feeling habits, your actual physical habits, your intellectual habits, what job you pursue, things of this nature. Anger and criticism is not inherited by your DNA. So, it's not like you inherited anger, you inherited poverty. You might, have been brought up with poverty or anger or chaos or affluence or wealth or middle class, or you might have felt included or isolated. It is very important to understand these feelings as they have arose, from your past, and see how they ripple through and ribbon through into your current feeling state, be state, living state, and lifestyle. And so I think this is a great question because it helps you to see then the dynamics that were set up and put into play, and then will either set you up to attract these type of relationships, whether you consciously acknowledge it and validate it or not, but also whether you are then able to attune to your inner voice. So specifically that of being repressed, repression and not being allowed to communicate, speak your truth, be respected, to have your own little life, to have your own little boundaries, your own little standards, to have that respect. So respect is communicated through, a feeling that you have boundaries. You are a somebody. You are an essence. You are a character. You are your own self. And you are lovable. That self exists in love. And not to sound corny, cheesy, like, oh, we had lots of love or we didn't have love. It's a feeling of effusiveness. In other words, meaning safety. I had safety. I had security. I had the feeling that I was nurtured. I was guided. During tough situations, a parent stepped in and intervened and settled things out. We shook hands. We hugged. We kissed. We made up. Whether that occurred or not can also, trigger whether you attract these types of relationships, meaning those that we focus in on the channel, which particularly have become toxic for individuals, which have become troublesome, have led to a lot of quarrels, led to a lot of anger, rage outbursts, particularly setting themselves up in relationships where this is an active living component. Rage. Are you with somebody, a partner, where you have to constantly be silent and then you have to take on so much, and then a rage ends up exploding because you're so sick of putting up and shutting up. There's a lot that can be said for people who have a high level of tolerance, meaning that they have not caused an issue. They're not trying to be complainers. They're not trying to be bitter. They don't want to be negative. They want to be a positive influence. And so to understand really that anger ends up becoming a fuel, and it ends up becoming a motivator oftentimes for people where they get a payoff from this surge of energy. And especially people who have not resolved anger, who have not resolved issues from their past, can be plagued by anger and rage, or quiet anger and quiet rage, which usually manifests itself in terms of self-harming behavior, self-limiting behavior, situations where you don't allow yourself to fully expand and be safe. You don't seek out opportunities. You don't seek out healthy challenges. You don't seek out relationships at all, whether they're healthy or not, because of this self-limiting belief. So these are oftentimes set up in childhood. These are the core of your being. The core, like the essence. It's like it can be referred to like the tables that, the legs that hold up the table. Your beliefs about yourself, others, the environment, the world, and the universe really dictate what you focus in on and what you allow. And also it's a direct reflection of the relationships which you have or don't have in your life. So it's to understand that, these negative emotions, if they're not smoothed out and combed through and worked through, is to say unequivocally that, if you're feeling like, things are spiraling out of control, it is because there are unresolved issues from these events that have caused this triggering to enter into and be a presentment in your life, as of current. And I liken it to just, once again, carrying a token, a medal, a charm, like a talisman, something that you carry with you. So these emotions can be either positive or they can be negative. And so if you, based on your upbringing, and you were around, what we call modeling or parent figures, which either, were dysfunctional, had mental illness, were rageaholics, alcoholics, passive aggressive, uninvolved, unaffectionate, unnurturing, hands off, no, not there, then we're talking about a setting where isolation and feeling of shame is going to be built into the environment and the milieu. So it is to understand that set up the foundation for the emotions then which caused you to then send out telepathically the message, I am wounded, come wound me. I am hurt, come hurt me and let me show you the hurt, So we don't realize that, you can put on a happy face, you can put on, you know, your productivity, would have you. But if deep within that core, you're still carrying around the anger, the shame, this then results like a hotbed of triggering for you in your current life. And you can be decades removed from the event. However, if you haven't worked through and looked at the cause that's created this effect, then unequivocally, you're going to be just a victim of these circumstances, and you're still connected to these from the past. So you're continuing to relive the emotions from these events, the feelings of these events, the mood, the temperament, the character, the identity. So it's all a continuum. It's all been connected until you cut the cord, until you say no more, until you go no contact, until you say enough is enough, until you say, I don't want, I don't desire this. I don't want this for myself. This is not in my best interest. Then when you make that pronouncement, then you'll let go of those triggers, and you will stop attracting and sending out that message, I'm not good enough. Please, come and disappoint me. What is very important to understand about energetics and psychology and relationships is that we put out message telepathically with our bodies. So, like a viewer so aptly stated in a Ted Bundy interview, that Ted Bundy, who was a psychopathic individual, he could spot his targets just by the way that they walked. So this is a perceptiveness. They can pick out who has a self-esteem, who does not have self-esteem, who is bottled up, who needs, a shoulder to cry on, who needs someone, they can just hear it screaming out loud from people's body language. So your body language can also scream out a lot of these messages. So it's very important for you to become aware of the messages that you send out, and then how, if it's colored to draw negativity to you, and that weakness and that meekness, or whether you're attracting health, whether you're living by your boundaries and your standards, and then you're then demanding healthy relationships, and then you will not put up or tolerate such relationships that do not bring you, that positive energy, which is, with boundaries and, the give and take. And so, yes, I think there's a definite correlation between triggers that have been set up in one's earlier life and then what you're experiencing in the present, especially for people who have not resolved it, i.e. put it to bed, settled it, and then let it go. Because if you're constantly carrying around that medal, that cross, bearing that burden, staying connected to those events, if you're still identifying with that, in other words, you have not allowed it to heal. It's to do the work is to say, this was the circumstances. Okay, this is where I was born into. And I take responsibility and accountability for all my feelings, emotions, decisions, and then higher judgment from here moving forward, so I can then enjoy my future. Okay, so and until you take ownership, responsibility, and accountability for processing and working through that, and then seeing whoever the players were, involved, and saying they were who they were. It is what it is. And I reacted this way because, I felt this way. I became isolated. I learned to be angry. I learned to self-injure. I learned to think in black or white thinking. In other words, in order to survive, this is how I adapted. This was what my body basically began to do. I began to feel ashamed because these are learned behaviors. You're not born with shame. You learn shame. You're not born with, pride. You learn pride. The toxic emotions. You're not born with anger. You learn anger. And then or you're modeled for such. So there's a real important distinction that you need to make. A deliberate understanding is to say, I understand now the players, the dynamics, the perceptions involved, and the perception was with which the meaning that I took from those events, and then moving forward, how then I applied those and assimilated these are all a lot of like really heavy duty psychological concepts, but it's very important. If you're a human being, you might want to understand how the human being works. It's like, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he went and off into nature to study, how nature works. It's very, but we're not really like taught this. Like we're taught specific subjects that are all, part of, the curriculum, but it's very important to understand interpersonal and intrapersonal dynamics and behavior, so you can understand yourself better. To thine own self be true. In Plato, know thyself seems so simple yet so hard. Why is this so difficult to implement? Why is this so difficult to do? Because we've gotten so far, into the analysis paralysis, or we're distracted by all the other carrying-ons of today's daily life. In the information age, we're bombarded with messages, images, people. You've got now, a million Instagram followers. I mean, how do you juggle a million people? I mean, it just shows you the overwhelm that this current society, how do you stay in touch with that? Like, how do you process that? To what degree is that a good thing? To what degree is that a bad thing? To what degree is this helping you? To what degree is this not helping you? Where is this really, and not just propaganda, but we're talking about real evolution for the care and your own best interest and the best interest of the planet, etc. So, it's important then to understand that if you're attracting, if you're sending out these messages, is to say, holy guacamole, I'm going to stop sending out these messages that I'm wounded, come wound me. I feel meek, so, come show me that I'm a failure. So it's like you're setting yourself up. This is the foundation. It's like setting yourself up for your future. In other words, it's basically, what is the term that I'm looking for right now? Self-fulfilling prophecy. So, but that is in turn super deep, okay, within your subconscious. So until you give your subconscious time and allow yourself to slow it down, God, in today's world, slow it down does not have a very good connotation, does it? Take time and enjoy the roses. That is not what all this, media is doing. It's telling you to figure out, get this done in 6 seconds, get this done in 6 seconds. So you basically in 1 minute should have had 10 things done. I mean, that is the conditioning and programming in my mindset that I feel is being bombarded for people today. I mean, it's just like the overabundance, the overstimulation, the overwhelm promulgates the anxiety, the depression, the isolation. You're learning. It's just like, who can handle media and who can't? Like, it's becoming, very clear that it's like, what, are you really getting off the track of what, your life is and what it's about? And, can you travel? Can you write a book? Can you build a website that, where you're engaging with? Is there something where you're growing personally and not just living a life of reaction or staying in the trigger, living the trigger, living the connection to the past, not allowing yourself to let go and then float? It's, are you heavy with this burden? Are you heavy with triggers? And if it is, then it's time to say, you know what, I've been so heavy and burdened with triggers that, this has exasperated my life and is causing me this chronic shame, which I think is really one of the most painful experiences, which is a difficult social emotion. When it comes to intrapersonal, intra with an A, which means within the person, and then interpersonal, which means with other people. So, the intrapersonal relationship needs to be given attention if you had this rocky start in life. So that means you need to really develop a good relationship with yourself, which is what the recovery journal is about, which is, you're getting closer to yourself. As you get closer to yourself, you get closer to others. You get closer to your truth, and you're not living in anger or shame, because you're able to participate in the activities and the creative expression and the autonomy and the industriousness, that come with facing those challenges and those steps which are unhealthy development versus unhealthy development. I call it pod thinking or nod thinking and behavior. So is it pod? Like, are you in your own positive, orderly direction? Do you feel kind of safe, connected with boundaries and standards? Are you in that? Are you living that? Is your life, catapulting up? Or are you in the negative, orderly direction thinking? Are you getting angry? Are you depressed? Are you staying stuck? Are you staying heavy? Are you staying in emotional debt? Are you staying in financial debt? All these things are like an anchor, keeping you stuck, and you're like, you keep pulling, harder and harder, and the anchor, it gets heavier and heavier because you get more and more exhausted. So it's to unlearn those negative messages, that were given to you. Maybe they were not given to you intentionally. They were not, they were given to you at the hands of a stressed out individual who maybe was not a great role model. So that's why it's so important to get a mentor, get a role model. That's also part of the tools that I discuss. So you have healthy modeling, healthy tools, healthy goals, healthy objectives. So you're going for something in your mind's eye and then manifesting, creating it, and being it, and understanding why. Why do I love this? This is who I am. This is my purpose. I know my passion. I know, what gives me that eternal flame. And this is mine, so you have a sense of ownership and, humbleness, and not like false ego, false pretense. Like I have to act, I have to put on, which the relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath, you end up, because of, we have these neurons, which are part of you, which is your empathy neurons. You end up, energetically becoming as the people who you hang out with. So just like the rich get richer because they hang out with those people who are wealthy and they discuss things, they have mastermind, the poor get poorer, they're hanging out with poor, da 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 da, and it's going, because of these empathy neurons, people who are, I also call it like negative water cooler talk, the people who always complain, then they're creating more people who complain, are you part of that group, and getting stuck there? Is it okay to say enough is enough? I'm migrating my feelings towards the positive now. Enough of with that group, that music, that job, that community, that mindset, that trigger, all that is connected. And so furthermore is to say, like, I'm going to disconnect my feelings from the events. I'm going to separate my feelings from the events that have caused them. So it's very, very important that you learn to disconnect your feelings from the events that caused them, and then move your feelings away from that. In other words, learning the lesson or the cause that created the learning of the self-sabotage, the self-mutilation, or the self-injury, or self-sabotage, or getting myself in trouble. It's so very interesting because people who constantly get themselves into trouble, eventually they draw to them people who will take care of them. The police, the incarceration system, the juvie home, the principal at school. You'll find then that people will be there to take care of you, but don't you want to make that more of a choice? Can you connect and with those people who you look up to and who you can learn from, and not be made in trouble with or perpetuate these triggers? Because you can either reinforce and stay in the trigger, or you can unlearn and let go, and stop reinforcing the trigger. So I'm going to stop sending out that message that I'm unlovable. I am lovable. See, that's where the affirmations need to take place. That's where this really needs to be repeated. This is where it really needs to be felt. You need to have the feel, felt, found within yourself. I feel, I felt, I have found now. I feel ashamed. I found that this was set up from the past. And I found now that if I acknowledge and validate that I can enjoy so much more of the present. So you can, employ and implement some of these tools and techniques. And, I'm really working to get these all curated, but there's so much to the process. It's like there's a lot of ingredients. So that's why I want to give you some tools to help you to, make this breakthrough happen for yourself. So eventually it'll all kind of congeal and coalesce and come together for you. And repetition, is so key and so important. And understanding the meaning, like the definition of certain tools and terms that you learn here on your journey about yourself and how you react and how you feel and what inspires you and what makes you sad, because it's unique to you. And if you weren't embraced and validated for that, then that could be an important place for you to start, is to understand that, that real you needs to say, hey, respect. I respect you. I love you. I acknowledge you. I validate you. I'm here to nurture you and guide you. And, and then get along that path, once you experience that. So you have to be able to give yourself those new experiences in order to heal. If you're giving yourself the same entrapped relationships that where you overgive, we talk about the holidays, viewers want to say, how do I cope? It's more like, why don't we learn how to deal? Okay. So the circumstances, the triggers where you overexhaust yourself, overgive, overindulge. Why did I eat all that? Why did I spend all that? Why did I say all that? Why did I listen to all that? Is to say, whoa, okay, I'm gonna, bring it in here, and I'm gonna do the work within, and I'm gonna realize the cause that's created the effects and separate my feelings from the events that caused them. So do you see how you kind of detach, and then you allow that whole root to kind of like come out like an extraction, where you're then pulling out at the root those events, and from causing you to carry on the emotions in the present moment. It takes practice. It takes a willingness to heal. But oftentimes people aren't willing to heal because they're so nostalgically attached to the fuel or the anger or the payoff from that heightened state of arousal. So in other words, anger could be either modeled or I'm only heard when I freak out. No one will listen to me. No one ever listens to me. So I'm just going to, freak out, yell, whatever it is, get triggered, and it's time to say, okay, I understand where a lot of this behavior is coming from. I understand where a lot of my perspective and meaning that I've reinforced and learned, and it's like wired within me, like, 20 gauge steel, where that's just been driven, it's been reinforced, meaning through repetition and experience. That's how your neural network is. It's just, it continues to be reinforced and carve, firmer and firmer neural messages, almost like, a muscle builder. Have you ever seen those really big muscle guys? It's because they've reinforced and they've trained their bodies. And then you see the muscle fibers. Well, you've got similar sort of neuron connections in the brain. There's the neurons, the axons, the dendrites. They're they're very much like a tree. They spread out and then they make connections and then they wire, and then there's neurochemicals that help and assist in that, and then create feelings and images. It's very complex. But it's important to understand the role of this and how this plays out and affects you, and to say, okay, I see where I had learned this. I see where I was modeled for this. In other words, there was a model that taught me this here. And so that's why it's so important for you to prime and anchor yourself. Priming meaning now when you get that out, to put in the positive, in its place, and surround yourself with positive images, sounds, music for all your senses, as well as anchoring yourself. So being able to make a physiological connection within your own body. In other words, when you want to anchor on the positive, you make an anchoring symbol. Whether, you make this symbol for yourself, like, I am present And every time you do that, you reset your neurology, the way you wire and fire your experience. You pull it back. I'm pulling it back. I am safe. And then you hold it there so you feel safe. So every time you do this, you're neurologically resetting your feeling state to remember safety. And then you call it forth physiologically. So that's anchoring. You can do it like this, like this. You can do it where you pat yourself on the back, or there's a lot of this EFT and tapping stuff. I don't know that much about that, but there's anchoring techniques that you can do. So when you do that, you're locking in that reset of physiology, in that feeling state. People do that while they're meditating. You see, how people hold their hands this way. It's a composure. They're anchoring themselves. They're resetting their neurology. They're slowing it down. They're getting into that subconscious, delta, theta wave state where things are slowed down and they can really hear themselves. So when you experience that more and do that practice, then you'll find that you're cultivating a better environment for you to be at ease and relaxed and not so intense and not so plagued from the past, not so wrought with triggers, but the triggers are falling off of you like the thorns off of a porcupine, or like the thorns off of a rose stem, or, the bristles off of a cactus. Those triggers will just fall away. And you're no longer agitated, triggered, because you've been able to call up the inner physiology that is in the present, because you've done that work. So I hope that this video and these discussions do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Peace out. Love you.